I'm Stephen Hren, and I'm co-author of the book The Carbon-Free Home. We're both from North Carolina, from Durham, and I have been a carpenter there for a long time. We built our own house, and I've done a lot of work doing historic restoration work, fixing up older houses and pre-Civil War houses and stuff like that. So that's kind of the background that I'm coming from.
Yeah, and I'm Rebekah Hren. I'm a licensed electrician, and I do solar installations. So I do solar electric, photovoltaics, and I also do solar thermal, solar hot water. I work for a really small company in North Carolina. And I also teach for Solar Energy International, which is a nonprofit in Colorado that does hands-on renewable energy classes that are usually a week or 2 weeks. And they're really great classes. They do things like passive solar design, and they also do natural building. And, of course, I do the photovoltaic installation classes where you're in the classroom for a week and then you're out in the field doing an installation. So if any of y'all are interested, they're really a super great organization. Yep.
So what's going to happen today is Rebekah's going to read a little bit from our book about how we decided basically to move from way out in the sticks where we built our house back into the city and retrofit a house. And then we're just going to talk a little bit about the benefits of more urban living rather than rural living. And then we're also going to talk about simple projects that folks can do, things that are specific to plants. Just like we had a really similar drought last year to you guys. I mean, we're the same affected, and Durham, I think, actually came closer to running out of water than you guys did. I mean, we only had
27 days,
something like 30 days left at some point. So that put a lot of our kind of rainwater catchment and gray water recycling things on the front burner, and so
yeah, we'll talk about some of that. All right, so I'm just going to read this really short passage so you get an idea of where we came from and what we're trying to do and things like that. Okay, so this is our story. Energy issues have always been a mild obsession for both of us. Early on, it seemed strange that our lives failed to make use of the obviously prodigious solar resources that were available. We couldn't understand why the homes we lived in were not designed to take advantage of the sun in winter, why there were so few clotheslines hanging in our neighbors' yards, or why there were zillions of acres of grass where there could be fruit trees or vegetable gardens. What started out as a passing interest led to more research and study. The deeper we dug, the more serious the issue of energy seemed to become. As we went about our daily lives, eating, driving, working, shopping, it started to become clear that everything we did only made things worse. Everything we did required more and more energy, and every day this did more damage to the natural beauty we saw around us. The weather got hotter and weirder. We had to give money to oil companies like ExxonMobil that refused to pay for their oil spills and denied global climate disruption. And our government initiated a preemptive war in our name, with all the murder and torture that the word war implies, to try to control the last reserves of dwindling crude oil. Our initial reaction was to buy a chunk of land in the country and try to become, quote, independent. We built our own passive solar house out of cob, a traditional mix of clay, sand, and straw. It's very similar to adobe. We went off grid. We tried to grow our own food and raise poultry. Meanwhile, we still had jobs back in town and often wanted to socialize there, which meant frequent 40-minute drives. Not long after the elation of successfully installing our photovoltaic panels, getting our home past its final inspection, and legally moving in, we learned that an automobile uses as much energy while it's running as 350 100-watt light bulbs. Driving an hour to town and back used the equivalent amount of energy as running our home's electrical needs for over a month. How ironic. We'd been criticizing our friends who refused to replace their incandescent bulbs with compact fluorescents, yet here we were, driving all the time, the worst offenders of all. On top of that, the idea that we could live self-sufficiently out in the woods turned out to be a cruel joke. Although neither of us had much of a green thumb, we had assumed it would be easy to grow most of our own food organically and with minimum petroleum inputs. Instead, we spent a great deal of time doing a halfway job and getting meager returns. The garden became our enemy, and we were shackled to it every evening, picking bugs and pulling weeds in the blistering heat. It became obvious we'd made a mistake. We tried to start from scratch and throw everything out, including the established communities and infrastructure of towns and cities, and do it all ourselves. Running away to live in the woods isn't an option for most people, and if everyone tried to do it, it would become even more futile. We were and are convinced that as day turns to dust for fossil fuels, we must take a good look at our surroundings and learn to live with what we have already built, what we've spent our free fossil currency on. The infrastructure, especially the housing that already exists in our town and cities. For us, it was time to learn from our mistakes and move back to the city. A city that had oodles of existing and abandoned houses just waiting for a good retrofit, a good farmer's market filled with local organic produce, and fringe jobs and entertainment. It was time to do things in a way that others could see and emulate. It was time to do it right.
So that tells you the basic story of what happened. We went out to the country and built this house from scratch, but ended up, stuck in traffic all the time, basically. Instead of getting to enjoy, this beautiful place where we had built this, cute little house, instead we were just kind of going out there, driving back and forth all the time, and burning up a lot of extra fossil energy, and not really having accomplished our dreams there. So what happened is we decided to move back to the city, and we were going to go back and since I had so much restoration skills and experience, we decided that we could buy a rundown house, fix it up, and on the way we could kind of take every aspect of that house, since we had been learning a lot about renewable energy, and convert that to not use any fossil fuels. So we have accomplished that. We don't use any fossil fuels in our house at all. So the book itself, just to give you an idea of what's in here, it's these 36 projects to retrofit a house, and it goes through each aspect of a house where you use energy, whether it's refrigeration or cooking, electricity, hot water. Offers conservation measures in that chapter, and then it offers low-tech DIY stuff, and then more high-tech DIY stuff. So that's where that's coming from.
Yeah, so when we decided to move from the country back into the city, we really wanted to find a very normal house. So we were looking for just a really conventional house, and we ended up with this. It's actually a duplex, and it's from 1932, so it's not in a historic covenanted district, but it is in an historic neighborhood. So that was one of the other things we had to take into account when we were working on the house. And the reason we wanted to find a normal house is that both of us think that a lot of times when people talk about green building, people talk about, I got to save up money and move to the country and build a house from scratch, and then I can have my green, energy efficient, zero energy house. So one of the main impetuses behind this book was to say that, you can really take any house and it can be a completely green house. I mean, we have this completely normal 1930s house that we've retrofitted to be a greenhouse. And I don't like to call it a net zero or a zero energy house, because what we've found also is that when people talk about net zero houses, what they often mean is that they're offsetting their fossil energy use. So by offsetting, it might mean that they put a huge solar electric array on their roof, and they still use fossil fuels for things like heating or cooking or hot water, but they're offsetting that fossil fuel use with an equivalent amount of solar electricity. And for us, it was one of those things where, we don't have enough money to buy a $50,000 photovoltaic array. That's what we would need to just keep everything normal in our house the way it was when we moved in, and offset all of our energy use. We want to make it so there's many, many things you can do to conserve energy that are easy do-it-yourself projects. First you bring your energy use down, and then you do the more expensive things like solar electricity and solar hot water and other expensive projects. So first you want to conserve, and then you can do the fun solar electric projects.
Yeah, and it's really the conservation measures that are going to save you a lot of money and actually help you pay for all the other renewable energy projects down the road. So a couple of examples in that regard, just to give you the relative efficiencies of, say, conservation and different kinds of renewable energy. So on one level, if you spend, say, $1,000 on insulation, that's going to probably, especially in older houses, that's probably going to pay itself back within 2 years, because you're going to save that much on your heating and cooling bills. And then, another relative efficiency is to say, instead of using, if you use the sun and if you use that for heating instead of for electricity, you have this different relative efficiency of So when you turn solar energy into heat, that's about 60 or 70% efficient. But if you use sunlight to turn it into electricity, that's about 12 or 15% efficient. So really this solar thermal, where you're capturing it and using it for heat, whether it's hot water or heating your home, is about 5 times as efficient, and therefore it's going to pay itself back a lot quicker. So just on the renewable energy side.
Yeah, so you don't want to install solar electric photovoltaic panels to heat your water. You want to use a solar water heater, a solar hot water heater to heat your water. So you need to take whatever technology you're thinking about and use it in the most efficient way, because solar water heaters are 70% efficient. They cost about 5 times less than the usual solar electric installation, and they pay themselves back in about 4 or 5 years, compared to solar electricity, which is really expensive, and the payback time can be 10 or 15 years. So you're just, whatever you're doing, you're trying to find the most efficient, least expensive method of doing that.
We're also proponents of just using stuff for as long as you can. A lot of people don't think about embodied energy of different appliances, and especially the embodied energy of different houses. And when you talk about building a new greenhouse, all those materials take a lot of energy, no matter if they're recycled glass or whatever. They take a lot of materials to build. But the same thing is true with, say, your car or your washing machine or something like that. So there's a general rule is that any appliance or car like that, about 50% of the lifetime energy of that appliance or car goes into its manufacture, and the other half is in its use. So if you're constantly if you've got something that's not that terribly inefficient, but if you buy a new one, then that doesn't necessarily mean that you've used any less energy, and you've spent a lot more money on that. So there are exceptions to that.
Yeah, so we've been asked as we've traveled around, people often say, okay, what should we do first? What's the very first thing we should do? And what we usually answer is insulate. Insulate your attic if it needs more insulation, insulate your walls if they need more insulation. You can drill holes in between the studs of your walls and blow insulation in. And then, of course, the second thing people say is, well, what kind of insulation? And both of us think any insulation is good insulation. Try and get formaldehyde-free insulation, but, fiberglass, cotton bats, rock wool, anything you're going to use, there's so little embodied energy and fluffy insulation, it's going to pay itself back so quickly. That's definitely the first thing to do. Caulk the drafts in your windows. One of the other things that we like to tell people, because it often gets lost in the noise, is we really, really like storm windows. And you hear a lot of propaganda on TV and radio commercials about pulling out windows and replacing them with double pane windows. And they say, they're so much more efficient, they'll pay themselves back in 4 or 5 years. But they cost a lot, like $400 or $500 per window for a double pane window. And then you totally replace your window. So if you have old windows in a historic neighborhood, you're damaging the historic integrity of your house. But storm windows work really well on historic houses, and they're just as insulative as double pane windows. If you have a single pane window and you put a storm window on the outside or inside and you caulk it, it's just as insulative as a double pane window, and it's going to last a lot longer, and it costs about a tenth as much as a double pane window, and it's going to last a lot longer. Double pane windows, there's an inert gas sealed inside the frame of a double pane window, and as soon as the seal on that starts to fail, you have no choice but to replace the window, because moisture infiltrates it. It's not going to be insulative. So they might last 15 years, maybe 20 years, I think, is like the upper limit for double pane windows that I've seen. But a storm window can last as long as your house lasts. They cost less, they work just as well, and they're great technology.
Yeah, also keeping the sun out of your house, that can be a super important thing with curtains, and you can buy really great insulated curtains, or just even any curtain will do so far as reflecting the sun back out, as long as you make sure that it's white on the side facing out. But there's also, we go into all these different kinds of things in the book, but one thing that's pretty simple to do, a really awesome thing to do, is to put some kind of green roof on your house, and we had a chance to do some of that. But a much simpler way to invite plants onto your roof that can have a great energy benefit are to build south and west facing trellises over all your windows. So if you build a trellis that sits above your window, and you train a deciduous vine up on there, such as like a grape or something like that, then you can use that to shade your windows into the hottest couple of hours in the afternoon summertime sun. And another thing, so people get chomping at the bit to kind of use renewable energy, and they're like, oh, well, all those conservation measures sound fun, but they're nowhere near as interesting as using solar energy. But there's a really awesome solar energy device that you can use it's called a solar clothes dryer, and what you do is it's a line and you hang up your clothes outside. And it sounds that's a little facetious or whatever, but if you use a clothes dryer, if you dry your clothes out in the sun instead of using an electric clothes dryer, that's about equivalent to putting about an $8,000 or $10,000 PV system on your house. So that's how much energy you're saving by using that natural sun out there and not using your dryer.
So we did lots and lots of projects on our house. We put in storm windows, we insulated, we put a green roof on, we put a metal roof on, which we'll talk about water and rain and gray water in a minute. We put a metal roof on, we do passive solar, and then we're like, okay, now what size solar electric system do we need? And so we got a 1,200 watt solar electric system, which is very, very small in the scheme of things. Most houses that you'll see have, for a living, I install solar electric, and I've never installed smaller than a 2,000 watt solar electric system on a house. And usually they're between 2,000 and 10,000 watt systems. And what that number means is that is the rating of the individual panels that make up that system. So on our house, we have 6 200 watt panels that are in a line on our house. And what that means is that we have a 1,200 watt system, so when the sun hits those panels in the middle of the day, when the clouds aren't out, we get 1,200 watts of power instantaneously. And then for as long as the sun shines on those panels, we'll get that power, and that accumulates into energy, so we'll get some amount of kilowatt hours per day out of our system. Maybe 5 kilowatt hours. But what was I going to say about that? Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, so obviously that's not running an air conditioner or anything like that. Like, we could potentially use one. Rebekah and I are actually big proponents of tying to the grid and, using all that extra energy to pump out to the grid. And, there's lots of different incentives and things like that. There's some federal, but a lot of them change state by state and county by county. And there's even some good city ones around.
So if y'all are interested in finding out what incentives there are for Atlanta, there's a website, the database of state renewable energy incentives. So it's desire, but without that first E. So it's DSIREUSA.org, and it'll tell you. And I don't know off the top of my head what incentives Georgia has, and it also varies utility to utility. So you can also call up your utility, and they might have a rebate program. But this DesireUSA.org website should tell you as well. It's a good website. There's info on there about how solar works and things like that.
So one thing we did, we put a metal roof. Our house was old and raggedy when we bought it. It had been a rental for about 20 years and was leaking. Had lots of roof leaks all over the place. One thing that we did was we put a metal roof on top of the existing shingles. So we put down new sheathing and put a metal roof on there. And we're also big fans of metal roofs. They help reflect a lot of that ambient heat and keep attic temperatures a lot cooler. And they also could last a really long time. They're more expensive to begin with, but if you are a homeowner and you are thinking about putting a new roof on, then they can basically last forever if they're maintained, and they can get potable water off of them. So instead of all those shingles leaching toxins off onto your landscape where you might be planting, your tomatoes or your fruit trees or whatever, good clean water comes off of them. So that makes using that water, if you're catching it in rain barrels and cycling it back into your landscape, that much more healthy and appealing.
Yeah, and they also, because they're metal, they reflect heat. So when we put the metal roof on, it dropped our attic temperature by maybe 40 or 50 degrees and allowed us to do rainwater catchment as well. Yeah, so we did this sort of two-pronged approach to water at our house, which is we capture rainwater. We just have gutters and we have rain barrels. We have about 800 gallons right now of rain barrels. We have 3 separate rain barrels, and we could get a lot more rainwater off our roof. We just haven't gotten the entire system up and running. So we have rain barrels to catch the rainwater, and we also do gray water to water our lawns because, I don't know what was going on with watering your lawns here last summer, but in North Carolina it was like no watering was allowed at all. So it was probably something similar. I'm not sure. No watering at all. Yeah. So because there was a drought, our rainwater did obviously not last throughout the summer, but we did gray water. So we had a gray water system that's hooked up to our washing machine and our dishwasher. And so every time we have a front-loading washing machine. We got Energy Star appliances. So whenever we run the washing machine, it's about 15 gallons of water. And you need to use it within 24 hours, but you can water plants with that in your yard. And you shouldn't water things that you're going to eat straight out of the ground, like lettuce or spinach or, vegetables. It's better for fruit trees or for mulched beds and things like that because it is, when it sits around, it can start to build up bacteria. And there are gray water laws. So in North Carolina, I don't know what the laws are in Georgia, but in North Carolina, gray water had been illegal prior to the drought, and then once the drought came along, they said they have an official policy of looking the other way. So it hasn't been legalized. But we're not going to go to jail, at least. Okay. Yeah, so gray water is anything that is not black water. So black water is your toilet water. Gray water is like your sink, your dishwasher, your washing machine. Unless you're washing diapers in your washing machine, then you shouldn't use that water. But it was really super helpful last year because, after a certain amount of time, your rain barrels are going to be empty. But as long as you have city water or a water hookup, you're always going to have gray water. So it's really good around.
Yeah, that's something that might not seem like it has much of an energy issue, or it's just like gray water, but all these things end up being intertwined and really related. Typically, a municipality, half of their energy that a municipality uses goes into treating water and wastewater. So if you can treat that naturally by, instead of sending it into the sewer, you biologically treat it, then it actually ends up being pure. It has less chemicals in it if it goes through a decent mulch and topsoil than if it were treated at the treatment plant. And then you don't have to flush that water away, and then when you need to water something, bring in new treated water. So it's not just a water conservation thing, it's an energy conservation thing as well.
Yeah, and obviously it takes some replumbing, but it's actually, it can also be really simple with a washing machine because of the way they go into their drain waste vent. It can be pretty easy to, and they also have pumps, so it can pump a fair distance. It has its internal pump that can pump the water outside as it pumps the water out of the washing machine. So that's a pretty easy gray water retrofit.
One thing I'll also have, you did talk about landscaping, but there's so many different edible landscaping options that you have that a lot of people don't even know about. Lots of people just think like, apples and pears and peaches. I guess you probably have a lot of peaches here in Georgia. But there's a lot of other, we only have a fifth of an acre. Our house is actually a duplex, so it's two family residents there, but we have about 30 different kinds of fruit, nut, and berry trees, and we still have lots more space that we have planted. So, we have all different kinds of stuff. There's just so many that are easy to grow too, like figs and blueberries and things like that you really don't even have to try once they're established to grow at all. And lots of other native ones. There's like June berries and pawpaws and stuff like that are native plants that also produce really good fruit.
Yeah, so we had a really, when we bought our house in Durham, we had a really large willow oak in front of the house that was blocking pretty much all of our southern exposure. But it was at the end of its life and had been brutally maimed by the electric utility, so it leaned towards our house. So we cut the tree down, and it was definitely on the way out. It was rotted out in the inside. So we've installed a wood stove, and we've gotten to use that wood that we cut down for the wood stove. But where we cut that tree down, we planted 7 different kinds of fruit and berry trees, and it's been really interesting because we're in a really super urban environment. People will walk by and they'll just be shocked to see fruit in the city, growing on the sidewalk. And a guy jogged by our house and he stopped Stephen and he said, I didn't even realize you could grow fruit in the city. It's like, sure, you can grow fruit in the city. But it's been a good way to meet our neighbors and talk to people, and then they'll come and they'll ask us about the solar panels on the roof and all the other projects we're doing around the house. So,
yeah, I don't think we can overemphasize how important that lead by example thing is, because obviously the problems that we're facing are so large ecologically, and running out of fossil fuels, global climate disruption, everything. They're so huge that if, just Rebekah and myself trying not to use not using fossil fuels and being as ecologically minded as possible isn't really going to have an effect. Like, everybody has to do it, but everybody has these inclinations. They're just not really sure where to begin, and lots of people are just totally ignorant of a lot of these things. Like, when we put our solar hot water heater on our roof, a couple of people stop me and they're like, what's that? And I'll be like, oh, well, it's a solar hot water heater. And they're like, what is that? Like, they don't even know that's such a thing, that you can heat up your water with the sun. Like, they've never heard of that concept. Yeah, and that'll actually save them money. So just this idea of, especially since these are things that we're kind of doing around our gardens and our homes, it just other people tend to see them. It tends to engage you with all your other neighbors and kind of help with that sense of community, but just kind of get everything going and lead by example. Oh, well, they were good friends of ours.
Yeah, but lots of our neighbors, I don't know if they were initially skeptical, because we went in and we started tearing stuff up. We tore off the roof, we put a new roof on, we did a lot of work on the porch, but lots of people would come by and they would ask what we were doing, and they would say, oh, it's been so fun to watch you over the past couple of years, like, we want to know what's going to happen next on your house.
Yeah.
Because everybody's been super friendly. Which reminds me of one other simple thing we did was we had just an open, it's almost like a stoop in front of our house, a brick stoop, and we framed it in. So in the summertime, it's a screened-in porch. We have these 4x8 really super simple wooden framed panels that are screens, and then they pop out. And then in the wintertime, we have 4x8 sheets of polycarbonate greenhouse glass, which are really inexpensive. So we have a screened-in porch in the summertime, and then in the wintertime, we put in this greenhouse glass, so we can have tropical fruit. We can have our little lemon tree on the porch, and it's also passive solar gain, so we can open the window and the door and get heat into the house from the porch. So if you have any kind of a south-facing area, they can become a good passive solar heat gain. Instead of, when people think about passive solar houses, they think, oh, it has to be situated perfectly, I need exactly the right overhang, it's like something you have to do from the beginning. But if you have any kind of southern exposure, there's ways to increase the passive solar gain in your house without overheating it in the winter, or overheating it in the summer, I should say. But really pretty simple designs you can do.
Yeah, and you don't actually, you can also, they have these panels, these 4x8 pre-made panels that are solar air heaters that you can just attach to the side of your house or roof. You don't have to turn it into a big window or porch. They'll work for you to pull in your air in your house, heat it up when the sun is shining, and blow it back into your house. So, honestly, we get by with that kind of stuff in Durham. I don't think anyone in Atlanta really needs to, use anything but solar energy to heat their house. It's 100% possible, I'm sure.
The solar air heaters were popular in the 70s, and they went way, way, way out of style. Way more out of style than solar electric or solar water heaters. That would be funnier. But they went way out of style. But they're just starting to make a comeback, and they're really simple. They're basically just black boxes that the air blows through, and you can attach them on a wall or on your roof. And they're really inexpensive, and they work well in houses that are insulated because they heat the rooms up during the day, and then you have to capture that heat for it to stay warm overnight. But they're extremely simple. You can build them yourself. There are directions in our book for how to build one yourself, and there's also there's a picture of a model that's made in Canada in there. But they're really cool, and I think especially this year with oil prices, home heating oil is so expensive. I think that a lot of people are going to have a hard time keeping their houses warm this winter because fuel is so expensive. And solar air heaters are, they're $1,500, but that could be 3 months of your heating bill, maybe even just 2 months this winter. I don't know what's going to happen. So both of us really want to promote solar air heaters as a good solar alternative, a low-tech solar alternative.
Yeah, but I guess just doing anything, the final message we want to leave with you guys is just doing anything actually tremendously increases your attitude. Like if you just get your hands dirty or whatever, or start doing things to your own life and house. I mean, we have half of the projects in here renters can do as well, so it's not just for homeowners. But when you start doing that, it just motivates you to think, okay, instead of things getting worse, I'm actually starting to make them better, and that just, to us, has been
positive reinforcement.
So I think we can hang around and talk, ask questions, and of course you're welcome to buy the book, and we'll be happy to sign it. But I'll end with a quote I will read a quote by Richard Heinberg. I read this article by him a couple of weeks back, and I thought it was really good. So, he says, "Taking in traumatic information and transmuting it into life-affirming action may turn out to be the most advanced and meaningful spiritual action of our time." I think that's true. It's like actually dealing with our problems that have been created over these past several centuries and taking a hands-on attack on them, literally. It's really rewarding, and we'll think so too. And thanks so much for coming.
If you've got any questions about this,
Yeah.
Is that more difficult than just waiting until it's time to replace something, or is it worthwhile to do that?
So you have a flat section of your roof that could potentially, I mean, how?
I wouldn't say it's flat.
It's like within the slopes, and it's got asphalt shingles on it now, or? Yeah.
But yeah, they were like just normal shingles.
I would probably try to, I mean, the thing about green roofs is they can have huge energy benefits. Like a green roof, typically, like there's been studies that have been done, and they're like, the green matter on there can reduce the temperature by 70 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, which can mean a huge difference in your cooling load. At the same time, you know, I sympathize with you. I would there's so many other things to do. I would take more time to plan that one out maybe and get a couple more years out of my roof and not try to wait a little bit longer till that roof needed replacing. I mean, one thing with roofs that gets awkward is because if you do get to the point where you are like, okay, I do want to put a solar hot water heater on my roof or a solar, PV system, then if your roof is going to need replacing in like 3 or 4 years, then that doesn't really make sense either. Like, you want to go ahead and have whatever roof that you're going to have on there and do that, and then so you don't have to take it off, take all that mess off. So there is some planning that's required, like step by step, especially with roofs.
Yeah.
So I think I would talk about that in the first chapter there.
Yeah, and a lot of people will ask that same question about refrigerators, because refrigerators have gotten so much more efficient in the past 10 years. But if you have a 8-year-old refrigerator, and so what I would do for the refrigerator incident or any appliances in your house is there's this really cool device. I don't know if any of you have seen it, called a kilowatt meter, and they're pretty inexpensive. And so y'all have you seen the kilowatt meter? Yeah. So you plug it into the wall, and then you plug your appliance into the kilowatt meter, and it can tell you how much power or energy it uses. So instant or over the course of a few days. So for things like refrigerators or washing machines, refrigerators are all over the map. And some old refrigerators are just incredibly terrible energy users. I mean, they'll use 6 or 7 times as much energy as a new Energy Star refrigerator. And I'm like, okay, you need to get rid of that one. But you don't really know until you can plug it in and measure it how much energy it's using. But kilowatt meters are cool because they can also tell you what sort of phantom loads you have in your house. And phantom loads are things that are plugged in and you don't know are using energy but really are. are, like those little black boxes over there on the floor. If you touch those, they're on your printer, maybe your telephone, your cell phone, your computer, all kinds, like your wireless router, all kinds of things in your house have those little black boxes, and if you touch them, they're warm. And even if they're not plugged into anything except the wall, if your cell phone isn't plugged in, they're still converting energy and wasting that energy as heat. And so they're just totally wasting energy. So if everyone in the United States was to cut out their phantom loads, it's enough electricity for the continent of Australia. So it's like there's a lot of phantom loads going on in the world. But you might not know unless you had something like a kilowatt meter. You can plug that in, plug your power strip into it, and then see how much electricity those things are using. And there's a really simple solution, which is just, put your TV on a power strip and turn it off. A DVD player, if you watch a movie, say you watch one movie a day on your DVD player, it'll be on for about 2 hours. It uses less electricity for you to play the movie than for the whole rest of the time, the phantom load from your DVD player. So it might be 22 watt hours to watch the movie, and then it's 66 watt hours for the rest of the day just having that thing plugged in. It's like when you see the numbers, they're pretty shocking. And it's so simple to deal with, really just unplug things when you're not using them or turn off your power strip. But it's good to know what things in your house use. So I like the kilowatt meter. It's a cool little tool. You can take it to friends' houses. It's pretty neat. But refrigerators, So I'm all for replacing old refrigerators. Yeah, we have a 30-gallon tank. So we have the washing machine goes to the 30-gallon tank, and then it's got an on-off that goes to a hose that goes through the garden. So because it's so hot, if you wash your clothes in hot water coming out of the washing machine, it's good to let it sit and cool down. And there's also the surge, and sometimes the surge can overwhelm the outlet if you don't have a very big hose coming out to the yard. So it's better to have some size tank, but then you have to remember to go empty it out, because the longer it sits around, the more bacteria builds up in there. So yeah, and our water is hot in the summertime because of our solar water heater. It'll be 150 degrees or even higher. Solar water heaters get really hot. The ones I install are usually around 170 or 180 in the summertime, and we have so much extra hot water that I wash the clothes on the hot cycle. Yeah. No. Yeah, boiling water. Yeah. Think so. Yeah. Yeah, we get. Yeah. I've been trying to think of things to do with it, but I can't. It's hard to think of things to do with extra hot water. So, but solar hot water heaters are great. I think literally everybody in Atlanta should have a solar hot water heater. Yeah.
It seems like in Atlanta that there's a lot of emphasis on green building, as you mentioned at the beginning, and not necessarily we all found that there's a good network of people out there bringing this to Durham.
No.
I think there is getting to be more people
retrofitting.
Talking at a historic preservation conference in October. And
that's a good place to start.
Magazine just called us up, and that's their new thing. Is when I started working in historic preservation, all their bumper stickers said historic preservation, ultimate recycling, and it really is. I mean, there's just a huge amount of embodied energy in all of our buildings. And there's a website you can go to, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it shows you how much embodied energy is in your square footage of house.
Yeah.
If it's brick or if it's...
And how much energy it would take to demolish it. And, it's a great little calculator. It's pretty impressive. But I think Stephen's right. I mean, it's hard because, like you're saying, a lot of people, when they think green building, they think new buildings. And there's a lot of green builders in our area, and I can only think of one really that's doing retrofits, and another company started doing retrofits and then quit because they said it was too hard to measure the benefits. So their customers were saying, well, we don't really know what the payback is on this because it's so hard to measure. But a good place to start is the historic preservation. I'm sure that there's one in Atlanta, but they're really that seems to be their new focus for the year is green historic preservation and green retrofits. But it's definitely starting to